All right, good evening. My name is Nathan Jones. Thank you for coming out to Theology of Music. This is my family. Some of y'all have been here longer than me, and so you've seen us come up through the church. But if you've joined the last 10 years, then maybe we're not as familiar to you. But so Michelle and I started coming here around 2009 or so, and we've brought up 3 kids here, and we've considered it a privilege to be a part of Grace and call Grace our family. I was just thinking of introducing myself, and I thought, man, Grace has been pretty significant in the formation of like who we are. So Grace is awesome. Here's the theology of music. Why the theology of music? Here's the rationale. These are a few of my favorite things. First off, I love theology. I love music. And it turns out that it's really kind of silly to separate theology from all of the things that you love, because it's necessary, it's in it. So these are some of my favorite things. The convergence of theology and music will become, if it's not already been evident to you, to me it's very evident. I hope to share that with you, how these two things blend together. This is borrowed, number 3 there is borrowed from Clara Scott. She was a hymn writer from the late 1800s. And she said that the chief expression of God is humanity, the chief expression of humanity is art, and the chief expression of art is music, and in music it is singing. So then you could just take and draw a little line from singing all the way back to an expression of God. So singing, music in general, is something profoundly connected to God. So that's kind of the why of music. The second thing I want to talk to you about is the objectives. I'm a teacher, so I'm used to having learning objectives. And the same is true apparently in the Army. Every brief that begins has a learning objective slide. I don't know what that says about the Army, that secondary teaching and Army have the same pedagogy. But the first point there, explain what music is and how it works. 2, see music as a reflection of God. Those are the 2 things I hope to accomplish tonight. And then next week, we'll resume with explaining how music shapes our view of God and the realization of at least one principle in our musical engagement. I mean, there's lots of principles, but I want to keep it practical. Like one, if we could just hold on to one principle to walk away from, that would be profitable. This morning, we read from Psalm 57, and so I want to borrow it as an introductory verse here. Jumping into the middle of the psalm, it says, "My heart is confident, God, my heart is confident. I will sing praises. Wake up, my soul. Wake up, harp and lyre. I will wake up the dawn." That phrase of waking up the dawn, that's obviously poetic, but what does he really mean there, waking up the dawn? As if he really thought the dawn, the sun, if they saw the sun as something rising in the horizon, I'm going to take part in that. I'm going to do something, sing or play an instrument that's going to take part in changing creation around me. Certainly he thought it was poetic, but I think there's something even more profound there that we'll circle back to in about 45 minutes from now. Let me pray for us as we begin. Heavenly Father, thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your awesome creation. Thank you for these folks that want to come out and just kind of invest themselves a little bit in this discussion of theology and music. I pray that it would be a profitable time and that you would be glorified. It's in your Son's name, Jesus, that we pray. Amen. All right, first thing we got to do is just talk about what music is. I mean, we could just go right to theology, but there is something neat when you dig into the actual physical science of what we're talking about, and so we have to do that. So for the first section of this discussion, we're going to look at how music works and what it is. And at any point you have a question or input. If you're an audiologist, please go away. If you're a musicologist, a neuroscientist, go away. Come back in 20 minutes or so, and I'll feel a lot better. But if you have any questions or input, want clarification, what are you talking about, please interject. So this is kind of a layout of what we call music. It begins with a stimulus, like an instrument, a disruption in the air around us. We move the molecules, and that's what we're going to call a stimulus. When we say sound, that's a really big encompassing term, but it begins there with vibrations in the air around us. If you think about it, the air around us, of course, is full of tons of little molecules, mostly oxygen, nitrogen, and it seems, especially as you're a child, it seems like it's a vacuum, right? But the reality is there's lots of little things in there, and we disrupt them every time we move, speak. Just the air that I'm pushing out right now is creating something of a ripple effect. But really, it's more like a slinky. Because if you've ever taken a slinky and moved it back and forth, when you push it, the slinky doesn't end up over there. It just pushes everything, then it comes back, and it goes back and forth. Kind of like water in a bathtub. If you make a wave, you're not displacing the water, just temporarily moving it, and it comes back. Compressions is a way to think about it. So we are, as we speak, we are pushing air out, or as we pull I did not bring my guitar, but if you've ever seen a guitar string or any stringed instrument, when you pluck that string, it moves back and forth, right? And that's what's creating those movements in the air around us. So what is the difference between, when I drop this, that's a sound, right, versus music? The main difference is order. Order. Oh, there it goes. I put a delay on that. Order. So when I drop this, it's unintentional. It could be an accident. There's nothing to it. It makes a disruption, and that blue graphic there is more artistic, but it does a fine job of showing what that disruption looks like if you were to read it in a linear format. It's just a chaos. That looks a little bit like chaos. And that's what a sound is. The difference between sound and music is when it's a structured pattern. So what you would see on this next slide is a comparison. So noise would be there's no pattern, there's no particular order to it, whereas a tone, what you might call like a musical note, when I play an A string on the guitar, that would look like that bottom line. So it's this constant frequency versus that scattering up above. This is a comparison of just what two different frequencies would look like. Still a pattern, still orderly. The difference is there is just the frequency. So if it's moving really fast, that would be a high frequency, and we associate that with a high note, what we call the higher notes in our musical notation. Or a low frequency is those nice soft-looking waves at the bottom. So how do we experience these movements in our given medium, which in this case is air, but you can, of course, hear underwater a little bit. But in air, the way that we perceive it is through the ear. So that's an ear. Isn't that lovely? I got a little thing down here. I'm sure it's caught your eye. I asked our science teacher, I said, hey, you got a model of an ear? So I wanted to hold up some of these components. She's like, yeah, I got one. So I went and got it, and I saw it and said, well, this isn't to scale. it's large. But, when we're done here, nice. It's large. But you can still see, kind of the fine inner workings of the ear here. So we're not going to spend time and break it all down, but just some of the key parts here as pertains to music. Starting with that middle ear section there, the malleus, the incus, the stapes, those are those three bones in that circle that are attached to the eardrum. And so the eardrum is just that, it's skin that moves back and forth. And I ruptured mine once, and it refused to heal, so the surgeon, took a little piece of my outer ear and the flesh from my outer ear and I just thought it was a cool surgery, and repaired it. So that's flesh, and then the bones there in the middle are attached to it. As those vibrations occur in the air, your eardrum picks it up, and it matches it perfectly, essentially. It has a range of what it can actually sense, but it's a pretty wide range. So those little vibrations that we saw in those previous slides, if we're talking in seconds, it can pick up from 20 up to 15,000 vibrations. So and that'd be a pretty high frequency. But when you get to 20,000 or so, you're talking like dog whistles. But your ear, that little tiny piece of flesh can vibrate and match that. And then it passes those vibrations onto those three bones there, which, as you can see, they're structured like a lever. So it can actually attenuate or increase or decrease the pressure that it's feeling on the eardrum. So if your brain wants to tell it to do that, it can use a tiny muscle attached to it and tone down certain frequencies. You might call it selective hearing, right? So it's real. It actually is a real thing. If you've seen like the
predominant among men.
Yeah, right. It's a skill that's been developed. Yeah. You've seen it with like penguins. If you've seen any of those penguin documentaries, the hundreds of penguins that are all over the iceberg, and the little baby penguin, whatever they're called, can hear its mama's little call amongst the roar of noise because it is looking for that particular frequency that's going to move that eardrum. So as those bones, oh, there they are. They're pretty small. They fit on a dime. So here they're larger than a dime, but they're tiny, tiny little bones, but they have to be bones. They got to be a hard substance because they're passing on that vibration, and it's magnifying it usually as it's pushing onto that next thing we're going to highlight, the cochlea. That's that thing right there, the snail. That cochlea, and I'm going to do it a great disservice, but it's basically a snail shell-looking structure, but it's filled with fluid and tiny hairs. Kind of like if you've seen the bottom of the ocean, the seagrass that moves with the waves. That's how I visualize it. But they're very tiny. They're microscopic. And it's full of fluid, full of those hairs. And as those vibrations are hitting the cochlea, those little hairs are picking up those frequencies, those vibrations. But each hair is picking up a particular one. So it has a whole range. As you can see, I notated it there. The lower, wider region detects the higher frequencies, whereas the higher, tighter region detects the lower frequencies. And so if you start to experience hearing issues, it's usually something going on. I mean, it could be any number of these components, but the cochlea, if that starts to fail, you would lose your high-end notes first, perhaps, and then you're not able to hear all these notes because those little receptors inside the cochlea are starting to fail. More than that, the cochlea is a transducer. It changes energy. It changes energy that comes in as physical energy and changes it to electrical energy. That's crazy. Okay, somebody say that's crazy. To me that is crazy. I don't understand it. And in fact, we have a lot of transducers. That is a transducer. It takes a physical energy and then turns it into an electrical energy and sends off little electrical signals, little electrochemical signals through you see the blue. Does it have a laser on it? No, I'll just turn it off. No laser. There you go. The little blue coming off the cochlea, those are the auditory nerves. That's what's going to, it's like an electrical cord. It's taking those electrical signals up to the brain. So there's the ear. When we say the electrical signals, we're talking about neurons. And it's going through your nervous system up to your brain, which is a collection of neurons that are firing away. So they call it a light show. People say it's lighting up the brain. That's what they're talking about. These neurons are firing. And it's electricity and chemical communication between these neurons. That is music, the blue part. Not when I necessarily just strum a guitar. It has to complete this whole process going all the way up to the brain. If you lose any part in this chain, it's not music. We'll see that here in a minute. So there it is, from stimulus up to light show. Mr. Floyd.
Question, so when we wear hearing protection, let's say with a blower or a lawnmower or whatever, what are we protecting? Those three little bones, or that shell?
I don't know what else it could be, but I would presume it's the eardrum. It's yeah.
I've been wondering, why are some people tone deaf?
Oh.
You're going to deal with
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Wow.
The scope of this seminar.
Listen, yeah, it actually next week that does play a part. It does. Max, the short answer is I don't know, but I would presume it's the meat, the physical stuff, the flesh, the eardrum. And then tone deaf, we'll get there. I'll have a theological answer for that more than the physical. But it is true. Some people have a great developed auditory system, and they can. But it has actually more to do with the brain being pitch perfect and having a good ear for music. That is more of a brain thing than, my cochlea is deficient. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, so there's the brain. Most of these little factoids came out of Dr. Leviton's book, Your Brain on Music. And I'll just tell you, as I've been interested in music and just reading books here and there for several years. So I have some really cool resources, especially if you want to hone in on a specific area. One of the real popular works was by Dr. Leviton, Your Brain on Music. And he's not a Christian. He's not a theist. He's mostly buys into the evolutionary model, but he has an awesome book that dissects the brain and leads to all kinds of existential questions, which makes it an interesting read. And he's cited a lot with contemporary studies and interviews and things like that. He's pretty relevant. So there's 100 billion neurons in your brain. You know, your nervous system isn't composed of that many, but once it gets up to the brain, there's the collection. Each with a lot of connections. It can be just a few, half dozen, up to 10,000 connections. And so when we talk about a healthy brain, we're talking about a lot of connections. How it works, regions and stuff. And I say that tongue-in-cheek, but really, if you listen to neuroscientists talk, they talk regions. This region of the brain is about this. When we watch them do this, we see this part light up. Beyond the neurons, it's a pretty wide open field of study still. They don't have answers for things like patience, jealousy, some personality stuff, but those characteristics that Christians are very familiar with and where they come from, neuroscience doesn't have an answer for it yet. But we can observe the brain with the little electrodes. We see the little firings going on, and it's mainly observation. They watch someone do a task, or they lose the ability to complete a task, and they see dead areas in the brain, and so then they associate, okay, there it is. That's how the different parts of the brain correspond. What's neat about music is that it's a light show. Music is one of the few things that stimulate the entire brain. You know, if you are speaking, riding a bike, eating food, any other way that you engage with reality, few things compared to listening to music. It lights up a number of different areas: the memory, your brain's ability to see, make patterns, predict patterns, your motor skills, your creative centers, and that's just from being what might be a passive listener. So music is a light show in your brain. Pertaining to music specifically, there's just some interesting facts about it. You've seen those little electrodes you can put on your brain. Those detect electrical signals at a very fine level. When someone plays, if I were to play a musical note, an E string on the guitar, if somebody was in a harness that's going to then produce these electrical impulses, those frequencies would match. What I mean is, if they're looking at their computer screen that detects the electrical signals, it's going to produce, if I play the A string at 440 hertz, which is how fast it's moving, that's how fast the electrical signal is firing between synapses. So they can actually see, by looking at your brain, what notes you're listening to. It's strange. It's strange. And furthermore, if you're a musician, you know the term overtones. So when I play a guitar string, if you could visualize this, if I pull a guitar string that goes, or bass, string goes from my foot to up to here. If I pull that string in the middle, you imagine it goes back and forth pretty fast. You probably couldn't even see it or count it. But the distance between the middle and up here, this string is also moving in the opposite direction. And then that breaks down even further. Those notes that are being produced are called overtones. So any time you hear a note, say the A string on a guitar, which vibrates at 440 times a second, you're also hearing those overtones that are much finer, but they're there. And those would come in it would double, then triple. Your brain detects those as well, even though they're unbeknownst to us. And they've done these really cool, one of the other books I looked at was just a series of experiments. One was really neat. They put, again, the electrodes on the person's head, and then they played just the overtones of a given known note out of our 12-note system. And the brain produced the bass frequency. Meaning, like back to that bass string, if you pull that middle one, that's the one we hear, we all call A, and we all try to match to, right? But if you took that note away and you just played the overtones into someone's ears, their brain could fill in the gap and produce that A string, that A note. It's bizarre. So our brains are, on that previous slide, there's a point there, our brain is a parallel processor. It is seeking patterns, producing patterns, identifying patterns, predicting them. It's doing all these things simultaneously, not one after another, but all at once it's doing these things. So what? This is really cool to see at the level of observation. Beyond that, we can state that music exists, our bodies are designed for it, creation is holistic in its design, and God is an amazing creator. So this is a soft intro to the next section, how this reflects back on God. So some definitions are necessary. Sound is a sensation produced by the stimulation of the hearing organs by vibrations in the air or other medium. A tone or a note is a steady sound, or that steady vibration, and music is an arrangement of tones, this special combination of different sounds that vary in pitch, intensity, duration, and timbre. People differ on the definition of music, but nobody disagrees that it is a collection of tones that sound good. Whatever that means, it's got to sound good. So then we come to the last phase in what is music, and it's sensations. Our senses, we got 5 of them. They're all present in our face. See, hear, feel, smell, taste, things we do. Those are all nice English verbs. How we perceive. Underneath of that, sight, sounds, feel, how something feels. Sense and taste are the results of those verbs, if you will. So those are our actual perceptions. The English made that difficult to demonstrate because we have the same word for both. Did you see what I saw, or do you hear that? And we're referring to the same thing. What do you hear? But those are 2 separate things that we have to separate. So that vibration in the air would be the sensory input, whereas the thing that's actually happening in our brain, those synapses firing, that would be the sensation. So we have senses, sensations. If you think about it, I'll just put it in a formula there. Sensory is data input. Perception is the synthesis of the data. Your senses do not equal reality. Your perception does not equal reality. So what that means is when I play that A string, it's making a vibration that's going all the way through that process we looked at, firing electrical signals in your brain, and then you say, an A note. But that's not always the case. Like I just cited that one experiment, nobody played that A string, they just played the overtones. And there's ways to trick your brain into hearing, like selective hearing, for instance. What is actually happening in the air, if everyone says I don't know if this would work, but if everyone were to say my name, perhaps I could identify Michelle's, but it's not like she's making an increased vibration in the air. I'm picking up her frequency because my brain wants to highlight that frequency. So our perception does not always equal reality. I can demonstrate that with at least one visual. If you're familiar with Plato's cave, it's not a new idea that perception and reality are not always synonymous. Plato was thinking on more of a philosophical level than our 5 senses, but if you think of the shadows that Plato used, that would be like our sensory input. It may match what is reality, it might, but it may not. So there's an overview again of the process. We're down now at the bottom, the experience, the sensation, the firing of neurons. So here's an example using your eyeballs. When you look at this visual, the A and the B square, they are the same color. I don't like that fact, but it's true. They're the same color. And I looked at it for a long time and tried to make sense of it. The description, back in the 90s, the doctor said, well, it's the shadow is tricking your brain, because they would say from a series of evolutionary experience, but we would say your brain, the way God designed it, sees the shadow and then makes up the difference. Says, well, that square probably is lighter, but the shadow's making it darker, then it makes it white. However, it is gray, and I had to edit the picture to prove it to myself, so I took a gray line that was the same gray as the A square and pushed it down through the B square, and then you can kind of see it there, how it's the same now. It's uncomfortable for me, but so those colors, if as real as colors are, were both gray, even though your brain was telling you they're not. So what does that mean? That actually has quite a bit of weight to it, especially if you are a materialist, and if they put electrodes on and they say, well, whatever we're seeing, that's all we are, that's it, that's the end game. That makes this what I would consider pretty scary. Y'all have heard, this was the longer subtitle of this Theology of Music. If a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? No. And what does that mean? That was too long though. So as a tree falls in the woods and does not make a sound, if no one's there to hear it. That again is an uncomfortable fact that usually is a good way to start this conversation. But if there is no transducer to change the vibrations in the air to the electrical firings in your brain, well, then we don't have sound. All we have are movements in the air. Those are there. But if you can't perceive it, then that's what we're calling sound. It's a perception, a sensation. And unfortunately, the same is true with color, and our sight, and even taste. That chocolate cake looks sweet, but that itself is a construct. It cannot look sweet. It tastes sweet, right? But it's not sweet until you taste it. So same as if a tree falls in the woods. What's that, Rich?
You're messing with me.
No, it's true. I don't like it either. It's uncomfortable. The color stuff is even more uncomfortable. How colors are not. Anyway, they're perceptions as well. So what does that mean, though? I do want to draw this somewhere worthwhile than being frustrating. Reality, as we experience it, is a construct, meaning your brain is using those five senses that we see as God-given and designed beautifully to create our picture and understanding of the world around us. And that's just keeping it at the physical realm. But our five senses tell us and help us make sense of this world. Can it be trusted? Well, that's where we diverge from the materialist. But if you would play this little clip, before we hit play on it, though, it's just going to be a minute long. It's the last minute of a 1-hour Nova special by PBS called The Perception Deception, and they talk a lot about this. It's not so much music, but it was interesting because they're all materialists, evolutionists, and it's very interesting because the science is, if it's true science, we have the same science. But when they start to operate with this presupposition that there is no God, we are not created, it's the evolutionary model, Big Bang, or whatever they posit, they're left with these now, what we're going to watch, just these existential questions or conclusions. We'd call them spiritual conclusions. And this is where we just part ways completely with them. So go ahead and hit play on that, buddy.
So all these years later, in my quest to understand where my thoughts come from and how my brain works, I've learned that my brain is an exquisite machine that perceives reality in the service of survival, not accuracy. The world I carry inside of my head is a construction of my brain, built on bits of sensory information, woven together with memory to create a conscious experience. Now, to some, this might sound scary, but to me, it's inspiring.
The simple act of opening our eyes and seeing a world. We should not take that for granted. And in realizing what a miracle of neural computation is going on under the hood to give us even the simplest experiences, I think this adds value, it adds meaning, it adds depth to our lives.
I think it's liberating to understand that we arise from this organization of matter. It means that we can be a little bit more humble. We are gorgeous machines designed by evolution as well as by our environment, education, friends, families. All of that is inscribed in our brains.
Sometimes when I wonder what I'm doing with my life, I think, how is it that a spatial and temporal pattern of electrical signals passing between cells in our brains makes us who we are? That just being a part of the team asking that question is worth keeping going for.
Thanks. Was anybody, a little feedback opportunity, anybody see any issues with their conclusions? I mean, they took 50 minutes and covered it at a much better pace and level than I did, but same stuff they're talking about there, perceptions and our construct of reality, but you saw their conclusions. Any incongruities that you noticed in that? Obviously representing a materialistic worldview.
Well, he mentioned evolution, but he also mentioned design and meaning.
Yeah.
And those two don't go together. Evolution
Right.
and design and meaning. If there's design, there has to be a designer. And evolution is not a designer.
Mm-hmm.
And evolution doesn't provide meaning. I get the sense in listening to them that this could easily be a defense for the relativity of truth, that there is no such thing as objective reality. It's all
Mhm.
perception. Nothing more than perception.
That second part could go in a has legs. But the first part, yeah, that's, I mean, when you hear designed by evolution, I'm like, wait a minute. I thought like the intelligent design, I mean, like, come on. Like, I thought that was pretty obvious that those are the camps, design and random survival, you know? Yeah, chaos. Yeah. Any other comments from that short clip? Some incongruities there?
At the very beginning, they said, we can't take this for granted.
Yeah.
Which would imply that you need to be thankful for it. But to who? To what? For what?
Yeah.
Father? You know?
Yeah, those words, those are value words, right? Granted. I mean, there's something moral to that concept of being thankful. So what are they talking about? Like, no, you don't get to talk about that almost, you know? Yeah, miracle of computation. I mean, that's in neuroscience, is talking about how the brain works, and then he calls it a miracle. Like, no, you don't have miracles from your worldview. It doesn't work.
Well, in one of your slides previous, it said, can it be trusted? And if
Mm-hmm.
this is all we have is what our brain tells us we are and who we are and why we are that way, then, I mean, we couldn't even push back if it's untrustworthy, you know?
You don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, right before that clip, the minute before it, there was a woman saying, our perception of reality is an illusion, which that's not, you know, in a way, scientifically speaking, just by the senses, yeah, okay. But then she says, we have to trust the illusion. That's all we can do is trust the illusion. I'm like, oh. And so the woman that started out said, some folks find that scary, but I'm like, no, that's scary. If it is just trusting the illusion, I don't know how anyone can, with a straight face, say, oh, good, we figured it out. It's just an illusion. All kinds of problems with that worldview. I mean, the problem is, obviously, we can all talk science together, but they're operating from a false premise, you know, that this is all random. There's no God in the picture. There's no design, even though they throw in design at the end. When we get to the end of the observation of, that was more consciousness and all of our perceptions, but even with music, at the end, they're like, we don't have an answer. But for us, we can take it a step further because we have a complete paradigm. There's no incongruencies. It works. We have a God that has created this world and designed the way in which we experience it. So another thing I like to highlight when we talk about music is just the appreciation of it and the awe-inspiring nature of it. Just studying something in more depth, and my experience has led to a greater appreciation and awe. If you consider like bird watching, for instance, I don't like it. I've never really been into it. I thought that's what, you know, folks do as they kind of move into a phase of retirement, maybe. But maybe I'm just picking on folks. I don't know. It gets better. But bird watch, because I don't get it. There's like 3 different kinds of birds, right? And you know, some are blue, red, big, small. We're done. But then I don't know if it's, you know, because that's going off topic too much. But I thought, like, I'm not going. All right, I'm gonna get out. I'll get out. But as I got older, I found my taste and my appreciation of things changing. And I don't know if that just came with the territory. You know, I'm not 20 anymore. But, you know, I like putting plants in the ground. You know, I put a hummingbird feeder out, and I just stare at those hummingbirds. And I don't know anything about hummingbirds scientifically, but I'm starting to get it. Like, okay, there's something more. These aren't just little rodents with wings. There's more than 3 of them. There's a host of variety. They got these peculiar behaviors. It's really strange. I mean, the hummingbirds, I thought they were just like little fairy things, and we watched them. They look so delicate, so nice. But as I've observed them, they do this. They have this strange behavior. I guess they're territorial, where another little hummingbird came over to get some of that sweet nectar, and the first one turned around and spread out his tail feathers and kind of did this floating thing with it. Like, it looked like he was going to war with him. And so I thought, you're not this innocent little thing. Getting off track? All right. So hummingbirds.
She doesn't even know where you're at.
So as we look at music, everybody loves music to a degree, but I would profess, just like my experience with birds and flowers at this point, it's not just a taste thing, but there are people that can experience things at a level that reveals this appreciation in them. And then when you combine it with this view of God that he created this world, he created it, and then he created our ability to interact with it, to perceive it. It just changes the way you view things.
So I thought her statement that our perception was not so much for accuracy as it was for survival.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I relates to.
Yeah.
That's really kind of
Man.
because where does that say? Where does appreciation come from, right?
Right. It doesn't work, really. But it's a paradigm that's very effective in conversation. I've once, when I was at an Army training thing for like 4 months, I befriended this Ukrainian guy that had a master's in microbiology. And I tried to keep up with him sometimes, but every time I thought I had a little something, he was able to fit it through that survival of the fittest paradigm in it. And it's not like it solved anything, but it just ended the conversation. But I think it was Chesterton posits art as the chief apologetic. He's like, there's no other art in creation. Humans alone do art. And yeah, you can't explain that. Survival, yeah. Thank you, Rich. That's a good point.
That's what William Lane Craig said, that atheists and evolutionists, they don't get to say there's beauty in the universe because everything fits through or is seen through a rubric of survival. There's no beauty in that.
Mm-hmm.
So he says it's wholly inconsistent for an atheist or an evolutionist to say, look at the beauty, the inherent beauty of this world, if they don't acknowledge a creator.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. It's almost, you almost get indignant a little bit and say, like, how dare you? If you notice that last minute, they were panning different faces. There's like, when they open their eyes and they show a baby opening their eyes, I'm like, yeah, we in here see that and say that is a beautiful thing. And we immediately think that's new life. That is God manifest, his nature manifest, this life. And why did they have it? It's about survival. Like, I didn't get eaten today. Like, I don't know why that's marvelous to see a baby open their eyes. In their world, like you were saying, Chris, in that system. So music as a reflection of God, there's layers of marvel to this thing. So you've been in a setting where you've sang together, and that can lead you into a sense of marveling, a sense of awe. But then just studying music, how it works. So there's layers to this thing. Faith is necessary. Faith defined as trust. The folks that we watched at the end, the materialistic worldview, they also have faith. It's unfortunate to see because it's kind of like, it's not working out so well. I don't know why you could trust that. The classic example of sitting in a chair, usually it's done pretty poorly, but, I have great faith that chair will hold me. It's held me many times. I can see that it's got 4 legs. It's structurally sound. I can be confident. Nobody thinks I'm crazy or exhibiting blind trust. I trust that chair to hold me. It's almost like they see a chair with 3 legs, like, no, it'll hold. It'll hold me. It'll be good. Trust the illusion or trust the revealed one. God created our capacity to perceive reality and then entered into that capacity. It's a trustworthy saying. Jesus came into the world. So critics would say, well, that's circular reasoning. But both camps operate with presuppositions. Ours is that God exists as we go to look at music. And so it's really a perfect paradigm. So in our attempts to understand music, and we're calling it vibrations and sensations, like, all right, we're still figuring that out, but we trust that God created it and created our capacity to enjoy it, produce it, experience it. So we're not left with these gaps that say, well, what is consciousness? Or what can we really trust? Music as a reflection of God. Music originated in the mind of God. It was designed by him. I read the little beginning there, music originated in the mind of God. I forgot the author, but Catching Foxes talks about marriage that way. Marriage originated in the mind of God. Because it's so easy, even in the Christian walk, to forget that simple realization that everything that we see and think and do, all of this originated in the mind of God. So what has God given? He's given us this gift of music. It wasn't like we just invented it. If you talk to the evolutionists where it came from, they'll say perhaps that was like the first language that was spoken or it was about, again, survival, calling to the ones you want to protect or get away from folks when you hear the sounds they're making. But really, it's this packaged gift that God created at one point in time, and then we have it. It exists as a potential outside of our experience of it. Similar to like math. We don't invent math, you discover it. Turns out there's this thing called order and design, and we're discovering it through mathematics. Music is actually the same thing. We're discovering it. So when we move, like right now, even as I'm talking, I won't sing for you, but if I were to sing one line, that concept of those molecules moving at a certain frequency was designed by God. We didn't discover the A note. It was that frequency existed. There's one book that went a little too far I read. Daniel Carmichael gave it to me. It's called Sing Loud, Die Happy. I was like, that's good. That's a Carmichael title. I could tell he was gravitated to it. Sing Loud, Die Happy. Great book, though. And he even admits, the author says, I'm probably going too far, but if you're a musician, you know the significance of 12 and 3, the 12 notes in our musical system, the 3 notes that would compose a chord. And so he's tying numerology into it, which I'm like, I'm not ready to go that far with music, because you're aware of the significance of 12 and 3 in Scripture. So he goes far on this point. But when we talk about music, we said it's the order, it's the design, the aesthetic of it that makes it music versus a sound. So harmony then, it would follow. Harmony, unity, beauty, a lot of words you could put there, are not contingent on our perception of them, meaning they're there, whether you recognize them or not. Music, and this is what's neat, a non-believer has the same perception as us. Either way, music is an inquiry or an indulgence into harmony, unity, beauty. We get to enjoy those things that are outside of ourselves through music. As we engage in music, we are drawn into upward regard. Now, I know that's an easy question to say, well, if you're a non-believer, no, you're not. You're using music in a different capacity, and that's true. So I mean this kind of more in our context. If we operate with that correct paradigm, this is a gift from God, then as we enjoy that and we experience that beauty, that harmony, that design, then we are drawn into upward regard. Music, as a product of God's will, expresses his order, his beauty, form, rhythm. This is my Father's world, after all. So when we say, like, behold his handiwork, there's different layers to that, like, man, he's awesome. Look how far away these stars are, these big flaming balls of gas. And then you can look at how molecules vibrate at a certain rate and produce this thing in my head that sounds beautiful. Music is a means by which we can dance in light of his glory. So seeing music and really all of creation, but I'm just highlighting music as an expression of himself. It is not God, but it is his handiwork. And that's how we can think of him, think our high thoughts of him. So these are the lyrics to This Is My Father's World. Back in Bible college, I might have scoffed at him like this. I know I liked it still, but I was more systematic theology driven. What can nature? Oh, it's limited. It means there's a God. End of discussion. I took Paul's claim. Yeah, what we can know about God is that he created, and so you better figure out the rest, buddy. But I'm like, no, that's not the case at all. So now, if you look at this hymn, just read it with me. Would somebody like to read this off of the screen? Get a break from my octave.
This is my Father's world.
Thank you.
And to my listening ears, all nature sings, and round me rings the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world. I rest me in the thought of rocks and trees, of skies and seas, his hand the wonders wrought. This is my Father's world. The birds their carols raise, the morning light, the lily white, declare their Maker's praise. Father's world, he shines in all that's fair. In the rustling grass, I hear him pass. He speaks to me.
Thank you. Yeah, so I would have.
Is that reality or perception?
Well, it is. It's both. Yeah. This, I forgot the composer. She, is it Carmichael? Carmichael. She, so she perceived reality this way, and then she believed it. She thought it was true. She thought it was reality, so she penned this. So I would say he speaks to me everywhere and say, well, yeah, that sounds nice. But to rest, if you notice, the only verb for her after the pronoun is I rest. And I love that. I rest me in the thought that this is his world. So order, harmony, design, how it is supposed to be, that's Aslan. If you read the first book where Narnia is created, Aslan sings it into creation. That's just a mind-blowing thought. I don't know how C.S. Lewis knew this, to do this. But we read Genesis 1, he spoke it into existence. But here, C.S. Lewis wanted to picture Aslan as singing, and he did, he wrote it. So Aslan, when he was walking around with his visitors, this blank space, he starts singing, and creation comes into being. And I don't want to speak for Mr. Lewis, but what that would tell us in that music then is in the fiber of creation. So when we say music, again, we're talking about order, harmony, design, the way spatial relationships between frequencies, that's all part of the created design. And that's captured in this fantastical retelling of creation and with Aslan and Narnia. How it's supposed to be. Music is a demonstration of that.
Well, the stars emit frequencies. It can almost be construed or interpreted as sound.
Right.
Or music almost.
Yeah. That's strange. Was it Louis Giglio has a presentation where he actually reveals that, and he says, hey guys, you want to hear the chorus of the stars? To us, we're perceiving it as these strange frequencies, but yeah, you can almost say the stars literally declare the glory of God.
Forget where in the Old Testament. Stars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Christians sing the Father song. It does. This lady and her son, that's Ilse Weber. She was a nurse, a Jewish nurse. She spent time in a concentration camp, and she sang to the kids amidst their suffering to comfort them. Now, this is where we're not going to go in this discussion, all the different really neat ways we can engage music in a therapeutic sense or a psychological sense. That's a huge field we could explore. And you've probably seen videos, Alzheimer's patients hearing music, and all of a sudden it awakens these other capacities for memory, motor skills, speech. It's amazing. But just for sake of time and being precise, moving on to our next learning objectives, I just want to highlight this one idea about how music reflects God. And so this woman, Ilse, she was singing to her kids because the kids are comforted by music. And so let's just draw a strange conclusion that the kid is experiencing what is chaos, disorder, destruction. They're in a concentration camp. And so what brings order, comfort to that child is singing. So Ilse was tapping into this created order that God has, because she didn't invent it. She's tapping into it and then using it to bring rest to these children. She was found out, and she was killed for it. She was executed with her kids, and the chaos in that case said, no, we don't want that. We don't want these melodies, right? So this chaos of the Nazi regime ended it. And you're familiar with this carol, I'm sure, which actually captures that idea. It's really neat. It was Carol of the Bells, written, Civil War era, and you hold these ideas in contention. How is there chaos in God's good world? But music is something that actually speaks into that, I think. He said, in despair, I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said. For hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then rang the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor does he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men. Music recognizes, cheers, and hopes in the goodness of God. So it's just interesting that he captured that idea. There's chaos and destruction here, but we're supposed to believe that it's this orderly, good, peaceful place. And what music is used to demonstrate and express that, no, there will be order. Like Rich preached this morning, there will be a point of justice. Just because we're experiencing it now, it is coming. And it's neat. Music is almost always connected to that longing for freedom, that expression of suffering and desiring for hope and peace. So we've seen that, and you can look just anecdotally through scriptures. The children of Israel, one of the first hymns we have recorded, they crossed the Red Sea. Their enemy is now gone, and they express, yes, we are free. The slave songs in the South, when that evolved into the black church music, that was this hope, this longing for something better, and that gave them hope in the moment, and they were right. It was supposed to be different. So it offered this point of hope, and just like we saw Ilse with her kids, music was attached to, no, this is how it's supposed to be. Song is a defiance of chaos. It's a hope for something better. It's a recognition of goodness, and in that way it reflects God. So what we covered, what music is, how it works, and see music as a reflection of God. And that is, it's vague. I'm sorry, I don't have a better way to encapsulate number 2. But what I was hoping to accomplish is to just draw in your minds the ability to see music as an expression of God's harmony, order, unity. It's outside of ourselves. We recognize it as we engage it with playing instruments, singing, and the like. And it can be used to point our minds and our hearts onto that reality, that God is our creator, that he is good, he is orderly, beautiful. Next week, we'll push into how music shapes our view of God, looking at it as a gift, also as how we engage it shapes our view of God. And then we'll talk about principles in our musical engagement. I think that's the end of my presentation. If there's questions you want to engage with or comments that you have, please. Go ahead.
At least for me to understand, art doesn't seem like art sometimes. I'll throw a glob of gum on a wall, and that's art.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
I think music could be that same way. Oh, this really sounds terrible to me because it has no order. It is chaotic. It's making sound. But how would you differentiate like what we call beautiful music and something someone else would call music?
Well, yeah, I remember back in high school, I got into an argument with, it was an online argument, just as fast as you can. And I was trying to declare that there were objective standards of beauty when it came to art. She was an artist. And she's like, no, it's all relative, So the difference between calling something that's not art, I think there can be a level of preference involved. I might be able to tolerate and appreciate a certain way that a guitar is played that maybe you don't. But fundamentally, even in musical notation, we could chart and demonstrate the difference between order and chaos. So, while some would look at maybe like punk rock music, be like, oh, that's not music, that's just noise, distortion. You could actually notate and say, well, no, it's music. But there are some, I don't remember the examples off the top of my head where they played what was literally just distortion and tried to manifest that relativistic mindset and called it music. But, they didn't have many record sales, So it's like, it doesn't hold true. We do that in society. We're trying to say beauty is 100% whatever we want it to be. But it's like, yeah, money always demonstrates the opposite. And I think it's true with music too. There has to be some level of order.
That's why my discovery was really neat to me. What I was thinking about with math or music, I'm like, what else has God built into our world, for us to discover? It's like just give more respect. And you think about those, Bach or Mozart, these guys, your assumptions about what to expect in the world God has made, maybe that has some bearing on the kind of work you do. You're just if this is an orderly world created by God, and I can use these assumptions to act accordingly, it's pretty neat stuff.
Yeah.
How would that be reflected in my life as if I'm a carpenter or just doing these different things? It's pretty neat stuff. Thanks for the really good.
It personalizes God too, That's what's really neat about it too. So your individual interaction with creation, this is personal, He designed my ability to appreciate this thing. So coming back to, unless there's another comment, go ahead, Sam.
Are the scales and the note, are those internationally the same? Do they vary at all by pressure?
Somebody might be able to speak better to it. No, for the most part, yes, but there are some cases I've read where they, like in India, for instance, they just have a different scale. But by and large, it's not that different from what I've seen. It's the 12 major notes that we use, and it's more about the spatial relationship between the notes. When we switch, like for instance, any song. Well, I don't want to get into theory, but there's a universal design to it. But just our embrace of Western music, most of our songs are the 4 chords, that we play. That's pretty Western.
It's kind of amazing all the different languages.
Speak, and yet there's it sounds like there's a very common understanding of music.
Yeah, harmonies are what we would call a harmony. It's like the same, like the different combination of notes. We have the same style of liking it. Does anybody can speak to that better? International musical scales? I know there is some variance, but
Terminology may differ by culture. The sounds are the same.
Right. Yeah. What I call
The tones.
Yeah. And it's almost. It's like when you change key in a song. It's the exact same song. The note from the first note to the second note is the same distance, but all you did was move up a step. So we're still. It's like a pattern that fits no matter where you start it, if you will. Yeah.
Nathan, I'll be curious when you get to it, and you start with the structure of a song. You talked about a little bit about chaos, that you didn't feel like that would kind of tip your hand on that. But I'll be curious to see how does there need to be a beginning, a journey, and an ending, and is there a biblical kind of format? I'm curious for that in the future. But I just also wonder that our motives behind the creation of music and the listening to music, could it be wood, hay, and stubble that just burns up? Motives is just for me, consuming just for me, or can it be precious stones, rubies, gold, whatever? And because of how we're doing it as unto. And you follow me?
Yeah.
So and so therefore, there isn't this, and I don't want to tip my hand, but I'll wait for you. But there's so many different genres of music that can be wood, hay, and stubble, and just burn up, or they can be a precious stone, and how we approach that. So I'll be curious on how that will go.
I'll be curious too. I know. I'm reminded of the way we define sin. Everything I think Sarah do that displeases God. Kind of the beginning understanding of sin, and then you understand it like how C.S. Lewis explains. It's a good thing gone wrong. Sin is almost always something that was good then twisted, or our attempt for something good gone about the wrong way. Like you said, motive. So I think music is a lot like that. That's why someone can enjoy music, be good at music, move people. But they're doing it wrong. They're taking something that God gave and misusing it, and that's a human problem. So that'll be interesting, Max. Drawing back in closure with that phrase that we began with, I will praise you, Lord. I need to back up a little bit. Sorry. I will sing praises. Wake up, my soul. Wake up, harp and lyre. I will wake up the dawn. So probably he's thinking this hymnist or psalmist is thinking, I'm singing, and that's part of it, this beautiful picture of singing, that the dawn is going to rise as we usher in a new day and praise God. But now with this new mindset, you could think maybe perhaps a strange application. The sun in the sky is how things are supposed to be. Light is better than darkness. And so he is putting music in the foreground of that reality. Like, I need the sun. The sun is coming up. I'm going to usher it in with music. It's a musical reorder. If Aslan could, in the future, as we hope, Jesus will sing again and bring it back into that order, how it's supposed to be. Can I pray for us, and we'll move out? Heavenly Father, thank you for music. Thank you so much for that awesome gift and giving us the mind to be able to talk about it and explore it so that we can in turn just see you more clearly and praise you for it. We love you, Lord. It's in your Son's name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.